Okay, so I want you to imagine standing in this cramped concrete basement venue. It's like 1981, right?
Oh, wow, yeah. Setting the scene.
Yeah, and you are just completely surrounded by screaming teenagers. I mean, they're thrashing around, throwing themselves off the stage, and the music is just, it's the absolute fastest, most aggressive, violent-sounding music ever recorded.
Right, pure chaos.
Exactly, pure sonic chaos. But then you realize something completely surreal. Like, every single person in that room is stone cold sober.
Which is, I mean, that's wild to even think about.
Right. No one is holding a beer. Nobody is slipping into the bathroom for drugs. In the middle of all this aggressive violence, they are actually launching this global health and animal rights revolution.
It completely shatters the fundamental image of what a musical subculture is supposed to look like, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because we've been conditioned to view loud, aggressive music as, well, the soundtrack to a total loss of control. But in that specific time and place, the absolute opposite was true.
Right.
The chaotic noise was actually the soundtrack to ultimate self-discipline.
Which is exactly why we're here today. Since you are always trying to connect the dots behind the culture we consume, we tailored this deep dive specifically for you.
Yeah, this is a fascinating one.
It really is. Today, we're pulling apart a column from MMR titled Music Changes with Food and Ideology, the cultural history built by vegans and straight edge.
A really dense, incredible piece of writing.
For sure. And our mission today is to look at how daily choices, like what we eat, what we completely refuse to drink, and what we firmly believe, how all of that fuses together to shape the actual texture and physical sound of music.
Right.
We're exploring the idea that, music is never just a melody, it's a live physical consequence.
And we'll be tracing a wild trajectory today, I mean, really all over the map.
Yeah, where are we starting?
We're starting in the sweaty rebellion of 1980s American hardcore punk, and then we're going to follow that philosophical thread all the way across the globe.
Into some pretty weird territory, right?
Oh, absolutely. Into the deeply abstract, literally ear-shattering realms of Japanese noise music. It's essentially a journey about what happens when an artist's personal ethics materialize into pure, unfiltered sound.
Okay, so to really grasp the magnitude of this shift, I feel like we need to step back into the cultural atmosphere of the 1970s.
Yeah, you have to understand what they were rebelling against.
Right, so rock and punk are the absolute kings of youth culture. But that crown carried a very specific and honestly very fatal requirement.
Yeah, the entire concept of freedom in 1970s rock was just inextricably linked to self-destruction.
Like it was mandatory.
Pretty much. The culture essentially demanded that its icons burn out. Drug and alcohol abuse weren't just backstage habits, They were the very proof of your authenticity as an artist.
Which is so grim when you think about it.
It really is. I mean, you look at the tragically short lives of those monumental icons from that era. Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, Jim Morrison.
The whole 27 Club thing?
Exactly. The collective understanding was that to truly rebel against the rigid, conservative systems of society, you basically had to physically tear your own body apart.
Right.
The heavier the toll on your liver or your veins, the more real your art was perceived to be.
Right. So rebellion literally equaled self-destruction. That was the established math of the whole recording industry.
Yeah, exactly.
But then as we cross into the late 70s and early 80s, that equation gets violently rewritten.
Completely flipped on its head.
Yeah. Hardcore punk emerges in these cities like Washington, D.C., Boston, New York. And the physical sound of this music is a stark departure. It's played at, double the speed of traditional punk.
It's just incredibly fast.
Right. The songs are stripped of all those long guitar solos and compressed into these frantic, explosive one-minute bursts. But paradoxically, inside all of that abrasive sonic chaos, this profound desire for clean living is born.
Yeah, because the kids in the hardcore scene, they looked at the casualties of the 70s rock lifestyle and recognized a glaring hypocrisy.
Right. They saw right through it.
They did. They started asking this very simple, but actually very dangerous question. Like, are rebelling and destroying yourself really the same thing?
Which is such a good point.
Right. If you are chained to an addiction, you aren't fighting the establishment. You are just participating in a totally different kind of corporate submission.
Wow, yeah.
So they realized that true autonomy meant maintaining total control over your own faculties.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second because this is where it gets highly specific. In 1981, a DC hardcore band called Minor Threat drops a track titled Straight Edge.
A legendary moment.
Oh, totally. And by conventional radio standards, I mean, it barely qualifies as a song. It clocks in at just 46 seconds.
Just a blur of noise, basically.
Yeah, just frantic drumming and these shouted vocals. It's a deeply personal, rapid-fire statement from the singer, basically declaring, I don't need drugs, I don't need alcohol, I've got better things to do.
And the funny thing is, it wasn't written as some global manifesto,
Right.
but through underground fanzines, cassette trading, word of mouth. Those 46 seconds resonated so powerfully that they accidentally named an entire cultural movement.
Accidentally starting a movement, yeah.
Yeah, because Minor Threat articulated a boundary that a huge portion of the youth didn't even know they were looking for.
Uh-huh.
They weren't a political party trying to recruit members. They were just teenagers pushing back against the peer pressure of their own subculture.
Which is wild. I always think of this like a teenager purposefully keeping their bedroom absolutely spotlessly clean simply because their parents expect them to be messy and rebellious.
That is a perfect analogy.
Right. Isn't straight edge essentially the ultimate rebellion? Because it's rebelling against the standard definition of rebellion itself?
Absolutely. It completely inverted the establishment's expectations, the adult world, the media, the authorities. They expected youth culture to be intoxicated, sloppy, and just easy to dismiss.
Right. Oh, they're just crazy kids.
Exactly. But by choosing absolute abstinence and razor-sharp mental clarity, these kids stripped the establishment of its power to write them off as just delinquents.
Yeah, you can't dismiss them as easily.
Because a sober, highly organized, furiously angry group of teenagers is far more threatening to the status quo than a group of teenagers who are just getting high in a basement somewhere.
Right. And that structural threat, it didn't stay invisible either. It needed a visual language.
You can't just see sobriety.
Exactly. If you're walking down the street, no one can look at you and know that you're sober. So they created this visible identity out of thin air, and they used the tools of the venues that trying to keep them out.
Right, the X.
Yeah.
It's one of the most brilliant instances of cultural reclamation in modern history, really.
Tell me about how that started.
So in the live music clubs at the time, bouncers would take a thick black permanent marker and draw a massive X on the back of the hands of anyone under the legal drinking age.
Oh.
Yeah, it was just a utilitarian mark of restriction. It basically told the bartenders, hey, do not serve this person alcohol.
But then the youth took that bouncer's marker and flipped the meaning entirely.
Yes.
They started drawing those black X's on their own hands voluntarily, like before they even left the house.
Right, exactly.
So a mark of legal restriction became this badge of immense voluntary pride. The message shifted from the state won't allow me to drink to I am actively choosing to reject your entire culture of intoxication.
And once you establish a shared, visible identity built entirely around bodily purity and self-mastery, well, the underlying philosophy inevitably expands.
Right, it doesn't just stop at alcohol.
No, because if you are scrutinizing every single substance that enters your bloodstream, the logical next step is to scrutinize your plate.
Oh, right.
So by the late 1980s, a band called Youth of Today steps into the spotlight, and they actively widen the lens of the straight edge philosophy.
Oh.
It stops being solely about avoiding illegal drugs or alcohol and transforms into a much broader pursuit of an optimized physical and mental state.
And this forms the exact bridge into animal welfare and vegetarianism, right?
Exactly.
Because if your body is this fortress that you refuse to pollute with chemicals, you eventually have to ask yourself how you can justify polluting it with the products of mass factory farming.
Yeah, Youth of Today made that mind-body-earth connection totally explicit. And as the 80s rolled into the 90s, the movement took its ultimate uncompromising step with a band called Earth Crisis.
Oh, Earth Crisis.
Right, so we see the birth of what became known as vegan straight edge.
Hmm.
Earth Crisis didn't just suggest vegetarianism as a, nice idea. They preached militant veganism, animal liberation, and radical environmentalism.
Wow.
And the music evolved too. It became slower, heavier, just these chugging metallic riffs that sounded like a literal war march.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting because I have to push back a little on this dynamic.
Sure, go ahead.
If a band's lyrics evolve from emotional expression into a literal concrete instruction manual for consumer behavior and diet, at what point does it stop being music?
That's the big question.
Right. Doesn't it just become a Trojan horse for a lifestyle manifesto? Does the heavy message end up overpowering the actual art?
Well, critics of the hardcore scene argued that exact point for years. They felt that when the ethics become the primary focus, the music itself is reduced to a mere delivery mechanism for propaganda.
Yeah, that's what I would think.
But for the artists and the fans inside the movement, separating the two was entirely missing the point. To them, the art and the manifesto were indistinguishable.
Interesting.
The sheer physical aggression of the heavy guitars and screaming vocals was literally the emotional fuel required to maintain the strict discipline of the lifestyle.
Mhm.
The sound was the physical manifestation of the anger they felt toward the meat industry and chemical companies.
Wow, it's just an incredibly intense way to consume music.
It really is.
But we shouldn't pretend that intertwining diet and musical expression is exclusively a phenomenon of like underground guys screaming in subterranean venues.
Oh, definitely not.
If we trace the roots of this back, we see these ideas intersecting with massive mainstream genres.
Yeah, if we connect this to the bigger picture, we really have to look back to the 1960s counterculture.
Hmm.
The origins of veganism in the modern musical landscape really synthesized there.
Right.
You saw a massive influx of Eastern philosophy, environmental awareness, and this whole return to nature ethos that deeply influenced the recording artists of the era.
Like the hippie movement, essentially.
Exactly. It was fundamentally about seeking harmony between the human body, the expanding mind, and the planet.
And that ethos trickled all the way up to the absolute zenith of the pop landscape. I mean, you look at Paul
A
McCartney.
perfect example.
He seamlessly brought animal welfare out of the counterculture and directly into the pop mainstream. He was able to link the melodic joy of his songwriting with a very clear ethical message about vegetarianism, making it highly digestible for millions of people.
Yeah, and then moving forward into the 80s, on a slightly more provocative end of the pop spectrum, you have Morrissey with the Smiths.
Ah, yeah. Very different vibe.
Very different. He didn't just gently suggest vegetarianism. He basically weaponized pop music to aggressively critique the meat industry.
Right. Meat is murder.
Exactly. Releasing an album explicitly titled Meat is Murder showed how pop could act as an active confrontational device for social dialogue rather than just background entertainment.
Which brings us to the modern era, where the boundaries between artist, music, and lifestyle have just completely collapsed.
They really have.
We look at Gen Z, and an artist like Billie Eilish really embodies this integration for the 21st century.
Yeah, she really does.
She is a massive global pop star, and she is famously vegan. But in the SNS era, the social media panopticon we all live in, an artist's entire existence is visible at all times.
Yeah, there's no offstage anymore.
Exactly. Their ethical choices aren't just outside the music anymore. They are integrated directly into their public expression.
Historically, what a musician ate for breakfast was a private choice. But today, in this hyper-connected, visually driven world, every single consumption habit is a highly visible cultural broadcast.
Right.
Across hip-hop, electronic, pop and artists' ethical stance on food and the environment is baked into their overarching brand just as deeply as their vocal style or their fashion.
Yeah, listening to artists today feels very much like following a modern lifestyle influencer.
That's exactly what it is.
The music is incredible, but it functions as the soundtrack to a broader brand of how to exist in the world. They're modeling a specific way to live, and the melodies are just the hook that draws you into their lifestyle ecosystem.
And it shows how the radical ideas forged in those insular subcultures of the 80s and 90s have completely permeated general culture. The insistence that your physical body, your daily diet, and your creative output are deeply connected, that's no longer a fringe theory. It is a mainstream assumption.
Yeah, but if the hardcore scene redefined ethics by strictly controlling what you put into your body, your food, your substances, it inevitably begs a weirder question.
What's that?
What about what you put into your ears?
Yes.
Like, if a basic pop song is empty calories, what does ethical listening actually sound like?
That is the perfect pivot.
Right. So to answer that, we are traveling geographically to Japan and shifting from the ethics of diet to the ethics of pure sound.
Yeah, the source material dives deep into the world of Japanese avant-garde. Specifically, it highlights Masami Akita, who performs under the name Merzbow.
Okay, Merzbow.
He is a global titan of noise music and personally a very vocal advocate for veganism and animal rights. But his true revolutionary innovation is the idea that the structure of his music itself functions as an ethical act.
Wait, I have to stop you.
Okay.
Leading ears as an ethical act.
I know it sounds wild.
I'm trying to wrap my head around this because
Yeah.
it sounds like literal torture, not a moral philosophy.
Right.
Like, Merzbow doesn't make songs with choruses or beats. He creates these overwhelming walls of saturated, ear-bleeding distortion. Using analog synthesizers and feedback loops push so far into the red that it creates actual physical pressure on your eardrums.
Yep, it's intense.
So walk me through the actual logic here. How does making me physically miserable make me a better person?
Well, it comes down to rejecting the concept of comfortable consumption.
Okay.
Think about it. Pop music is designed to be incredibly easy to consume. You absorb it passively. It asks absolutely nothing of your intellect or your body.
Right, you can just play it in the background at a grocery store.
Exactly. But by generating extreme, unrelenting sonic overload, Merzbow places a massive physical and mental load on the listener. It is fundamentally unconsumable as mere entertainment.
Okay, I think I'm following.
In a capitalist society that's driven by thoughtless, passive consumption, deliberately providing an unconsumable experience is a profound ethical stance.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Just as straight edge rejected the comfort of substance abuse to stay sharp, Merzbow rejects the comfort of easy listening to force the audience into total uncomfortable awareness.
You know, that actually makes a bizarre kind of sense.
Doesn't it?
Yeah. Listening to Merzbow sounds like the audio equivalent of running an ultramarathon through Death Valley or eating a ghost pepper.
Exactly.
You absolutely do not do it because it's fun in a traditional sense. You do it to intentionally test your own psychological and physical limits. Is this extreme noise music essentially a workout for your ethics?
Yeah, it completely strips away all your passive filters and forces you to be intensely present in your own discomfort.
That is fascinating.
And the source material also brings up another giant of the Japanese avant-garde, Keiji Haino.
Okay, how does he fit into this?
Well, he takes a slightly different but deeply physical path. Haino doesn't use political slogans or overt ethical manifestos about veganism. Instead, his improvised performances, which utilize, screaming vocal cords, explosive bursts of guitar feedback, and these stretches of profound, heavy silence, they test the absolute anatomical limits of the human body.
So if straight edge was about strict asceticism and control, and 70s rock was about hedonism and losing control, where on that spectrum does Haino fit?
He actually creates what the source describes as a third physicality.
A third physicality.
Yeah, he sits completely outside the binary of control versus chaos. Haino is using sound to ask how far can the physical human body become an instrument of raw frequency.
Wow.
It's an exploration of existence that just transcends the meaning of lyrical words or standard morality. It's a pure inquiry into what a human being can withstand and produce before physically breaking down.
Man, we've gone from the ethics of a clean lifestyle to the ethics of punishing noise.
It's quite a leap.
It really is. So let's look at how other extreme genres deal with the rot of society, because the source material draws an incredible contrast by bringing us back to the West, specifically to the pioneers of industrial music in the UK.
Right, so if you look at late 70s Britain, it was a grim post-industrial landscape defined by economic depression, strikes, and really heavy social control.
Very bleak.
Very. And the band Throbbing Gristle pioneered industrial music right in the middle of this. But instead of playing guitars, they used the actual mechanisms of the era.
What do you mean?
I mean, take loops, screeching metal, high-frequency oscillators, and the literal low-frequency hums of factory machinery.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they used acoustics to reflect the violence and bleakness of society back at the audience. It wasn't an escape from reality. It was a brutal amplification of it.
So we end up with two entirely opposing ethical frameworks using sound to solve the exact same problem. Straight edge represents the ethics of rejection. Society is toxic, capitalism is poisoning our food, so I will refuse to partake. I will build a fortress around my body and keep myself pure.
Right. And what's fascinating here is how industrial and power electronics represent the exact opposite strategy. The ethics of exposure.
Okay.
Instead of retreating into personal purity, artists like Throbbing Gristle deliberately shoved society's most uncomfortable, violent, and ugly realities directly into the spotlight. They basically forced the listener to look at the rot.
You know, it makes me think of how we handle a virus.
How so?
Well, if straight edge is hiding from the virus by locking yourself in a sterile room, industrial music is like a vaccine.
Oh, that's good.
It injects a deadened, concentrated dose of society's sickness directly into your system, so you are forcefully compelled to build an immunity to it.
That's exactly what it is.
So, what does this all mean? If straight edge is putting up an umbrella to block the toxic rain, and industrial is forcing everyone to stare directly at the polluted clouds, which approach actually does a better job of shaking up the listener and changing society?
I think that tension is the defining struggle of underground music, honestly.
Yeah.
Yeah, because rejection effectively protects the individual and builds this incredibly disciplined, self-reliant community.
Right.
Exposure, however, forces the broader collective to acknowledge its own sickness, stripping away the luxury of ignorance. They are both vital mechanisms.
I see.
Rejection asks, how do we protect ourselves to survive?
Yeah.
Exposure asks, how do we confront the reality so we can finally dismantle it? They deploy entirely different sonic weapons, silence and control versus noise and chaos. But they are fighting the exact same war against a destructive status quo.
Man, that's profound. Let's bring all these threads together. Today, we've gone on a massive sonic journey.
We really have.
We started with the foundational premise that music is never merely sound. Through the straight edge and vegan movements, we saw how heavy, aggressive music was leveraged to answer the practical question, how should we live?
Right.
We watched personal ethics evolve into a visible lifestyle, and that lifestyle merged completely with the art.
And then, through the abrasive walls of avant-garde noise
Mm.
and the industrial soundscapes of the UK, we saw art used to ask the existential question, how should we exist?
Yeah.
It showed us how pushing the human body and mind to their absolute limits can shatter our passive consumption habits and reveal totally new ways of being.
But the core tenet that binds all of these disparate artists together, I mean, from the 46-second hardcore punk blast to the hour-long wall of Japanese synthesizer noise, is this. They completely refuse to separate their personal ethics and their physical bodies from their creative output.
Absolutely.
The music is the life, and the life is the music.
It's a deeply holistic approach to creativity that just demands utter, uncompromising authenticity from the artist and the audience alike.
Yeah, so since you are always digging into the layers behind the media we absorb, I want you to open up your phone later today and really look at your favorite playlist.
That's a great exercise.
Just look at the artists you have on heavy rotation. What do the people you listen to actually advocate for? What do they refuse to consume? How do they maneuver through the world?
It's so important to ask.
Because whether it's a massive mainstream pop star or an obscure underground producer, your daily soundtrack is carrying a vast amount of ideological weight. Every time you hit play, you are consuming an artist's ethics right alongside their melodies.
And as we consider how deeply intertwined sound and human lifestyle have always been, I really want to leave you with a final thought to mull over.
Okay, let's hear it.
If every major cultural shift in diet and philosophy creates its own unique sonic rebellion, from the fast, hyper-disciplined aggression of 80s hardcore to the massive, physically unconsumable walls of 90s noise, what is the sound of our current era going to be?
Oh.
We are deep into a hyper-connected, AI-driven information age where every single aspect of life is increasingly optimized, synthesized, and frictionless.
Everything is so smooth now.
Exactly. So as our daily existence becomes more digital and further detached from the physical realities of the human body, what will the next true musical rebellion actually sound like?
That is the million-dollar question.
Will the ultimate rejection of this era be a tidal wave of overwhelming algorithmic noise? Or in a world that never stops broadcasting, will the ultimate ethical rebellion just be absolute profound silence?
Wow. Whatever it turns out to be, when the window of easy consumption inevitably slams shut again, we are going to have to decide if we are truly ready for the discomfort of what it serves up next.